Welcome to my Nostalgia Trip Games. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at some of the games through which I got introduced to the NES. Now, I've got a modified PAL system, so I can play some NTSC games as well, with occasional minor hiccups. And also, because of this, I've had to change my regular LCD television into a old-fashioned CRT type television. But I'll be talking more about that later on.
Before I pull out the Zapper for real, I've got a few other games to deal with. The first game I remember seeing on a Nintendo television advert back in 1987 most likely was Rad Racer, and a couple of other games, which I think were Metroid and probably the first Super Mario Bros. Game, not entirely sure though. But Rad Racer was the first game that I got truly interested in when it came to Nintendo. I remember one of my neighbors had it in the late 80s, but I don't think I ever got to try it out back then. Rad Racer is a furiously fast racing game that has inherited its style from Pole Position, Enduro Racer, and other such games. Although it's also a racing game with a harsh learning curve and difficulty level, surprisingly the game is more about memorizing patterns than zooming through random traffic in impossible speeds. The graphics are adequately nice, but super fast, which makes all the difference, and the music is excellent, definitely an NES classic in all senses of the word. Although my connection to the game was fleeting at best back in the day, it was the primary reason for me to develop a grudging interest in the NES. The grudge wasn't as much about Nintendo being the enemy for the computers, because it wasn't considered as such at that point, but more about my soon coming to realize how much more expensive the games were for the NES, and that copying games was practically impossible. So I never got an NES until my cousin sold his system to me in the early 2000s, and naturally, Rad Racer is now in my collection. Not a game I play all that much, but it's a game that ignited my interest in the NES, thus worth having in a nostalgia trip. Yeah, Super Mario Bros. What is there to say that hasn't been said before? Well, when I first saw the game in action, I didn't think it was all that special, even though it took me a while to understand how to properly play it, but then again I was about 5 or 6 years old back then. Well, might have had something to do with a control that was completely alien to me, having grown up already with a rubbery keyboard and a Spectrum and joysticks. Using something other than the up direction for jumping was illogical to me even then, because why would anyone think pressing the A button would be a realistic representation of the real-life function of jumping? Nope, you just have to press the A button to jump. Okay, and maybe I'm taking this a bit far here, but so does the angry video game nerd and everyone else when cursing the opposite regarding joysticks. Okay, rant over. But yeah, Super Mario Bros. Is okay in my book really, but I have to specify that I'd rather play the PAL version of the game with the faster music because I've grown used to it. That's what we had here in PAL area, and to us it was normal until the internet showed us different. To me, it's the original version that's slow. For a few good reasons, Super Mario and Giana Sisters were always put against each other, but the lawsuit that Nintendo allegedly put against Rainbow Arts for doing such a blatant copy of the brothers definitely put a certain part of the world's gamers hate Nintendo for it. I can't say either game is better, but that they are different versions of a similar idea. While Giana Sisters has many kinds of weapons and other items to use, Super Mario Bros. Has quite a bit more. It has the running button, which makes a huge difference, and there are swimming levels as well, which gives some nice variety. The level design is, I had to admit, for the most part genius, whereas the Giana levels are a bit hit and miss. And I guess it proves something about games that are over 30 years old, that people are still obsessed about Super Mario Bros. In such intensity as to constantly figure out new ways of doing faster speedruns. For me, it's enough that I run through the game once or twice a year using the usual warp zones and seeing if I can at least finish one round of the game without dying once. But I do that with Giana Sisters too. Okay, let's bring the Zapper out now and hunt some ducks. Yes, it's practically every Nintendo gamer's first game that required a light gun, because it was coupled with the Super Mario Bros. As a re-release for the NES bundles in most regions. As I mentioned earlier though, light guns are a bit difficult to use these days because modern LCD televisions don't cooperate with light guns, so you need an old school CRT for it. While making preparations for this episode though, I noticed that my specific CRT television at least has its SCART input a bit weird and it doesn't receive light gun signals properly, so I had to actually find the right channel through RF input, which finally got the light gun working. Which, by the way, essentially explains the video quality. Anyway, let's get back to the game itself. In fact, you sort of get two games for one here, duck shooting and clay shooting. The big attraction here is, of course, the dog. He barks happily and jumps into the bushes when you start your hunting season, picks up the ducks you have shot after every 2 or 3 shots, but when you fail to shoot a duck within a set of 3 shots, he makes an appearance just to laugh at you. Sometimes you just want to shoot that dog, but of course Nintendo wouldn't let you do that, because that would be brutal. The clay shooting segment is a nice alternative practice mode, but it's not nearly as charming as the actual game itself. Another reason why every kid of my age and younger in most areas of the Western world in the late 80s all of a sudden developed a desperate need to get themselves an NES was because of the first game for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise had been released for home consoles and computers, and the NES was considered to be the spiritual home for that kind of action. Which I agree up to a certain point. And of course, the Ninja Turtles were already a great success in cartoons and comic books, so it was only logical that a game based on it should appear. In Europe, the game was retitled as Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles for whatever reason, but I didn't think it really mattered because I wasn't a fan of the show or the comics, but yes, ninja sounds better than hero. Anyway, a few of my NES playing friends had this game back in the day, and eventually a C64 version appeared and I bought my own copy of such, included in a compilation called Movie Premiere. Some 15 years later, I got a Japanese copy of it for cheap, but I'm playing the more familiar European version from an EverDrive cartridge here. Frankly, the first Ninja Turtles game isn't particularly good, but I have more nostalgia for it than the later Ninja Turtles games, which are mostly street brawlers, which works better in the context. This one's more of a platforming action-adventure kind of a mess, and features an infamous swimming level that kills every gamer's enthusiasm for Ninja Turtle action. But even through this game, every kid seemed to find their own favorite Ninja Turtle. Mine was Donatello, because his weapon was the most useful in the game. I had no idea about their personalities until I saw the movies a few years later. I almost wish I hadn't. But still, nostalgia is unavoidable. The last game for today is a surprisingly late release, but perhaps that only goes to show how late the NES came into our area and what were the most played games at the time. Games based on Disney's popular cartoon shows were always popular and vice versa. Disney's games often became popular cartoons to watch on TV. Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers was kind of both. The game was released around the height of the show's popularity, and the game fed the interest to watch the show. The game itself is the expected high-quality platforming action from Capcom, with a strange twist regarding teamwork. The game is supposed to be played as a 2-player team as Chip and Dale, while the side characters help you out occasionally. If I remember correctly, the twist is that the game is almost impossible to beat with both players. Rescue Rangers is still a fun game to get annoyed with your friends and the game in front of a TV.